Child cruelty boggles even the most sophisticated imagination. We will tell you about the wildest cases when little kids strangled their parents, stabbed neighbors with knives, or participated in real robberies with hijackings and corpses in the woods. And at the end, there will be the most brutal case when 13-year-old brats took on contract killing, bludgeoning the victim with toy bats. Jasmine Richardson. And let's start with the little girl who had just turned 12 when she decided to massacre her little brother. Why did the sister decide to do this? As the investigation showed, the girl was friends with Jeremy Steinken, who was already 23 years old. The guy was known throughout the neighborhood because he convinced others that he was a werewolf, which is several centuries old. Jeremy was thirsty for blood and encouraged his little follower to deal with her 8-year-old brother. This brutal murder made Jasmine the youngest murderer in Canadian history. But her punishment was not too serious. First 4 years in a local mental hospital and then another 6 in jail. Already in 2016, the young 22-year-old was released, quickly changed her documents and started a new life as if nothing had ever happened. Mary Bell, and this girl became the UK's youngest ever murderer. Mary Bell was 10 years old when she was already actively demonstrating her sadistic tendencies. The girl showed interest in physical and sexual violence, experimenting with pets. She wasn't shy about picking fights with her Delaval Road classmates, trying to casually strangle them while playing. She constantly broke everything, threw everything. Teachers just hated the girl, more than once turning to child psychologists. Literally the day before her birthday, when she was supposed to be 11 years old, the little girl decided to please herself, to strangle Martin Brown, a neighbor boy of 4 years. But no one thought of the girl Maniac, and she got another chance to kill, and Mary didn't have to wait long. The next one was 3-year-old Brian Howe. The girl first strangled the boy and then started picking his body with scissors. The boy just couldn't resist Mary, who was several times his size. In the end, the girl was captured and put on trial, where she confessed to the consciousness of her actions. She just liked the feelings she had at the time of the murder. Bell was imprisoned for 12 years and then went free, starting a new life. The girl became a mom herself and then a grandmother. When journalists came to her family, she turned to the police and got into a program of lifelong anonymity. After all, one wants to live a comfortable life, so as not to be reminded of silly things. Craig Price. Craig Price had just turned 13 years old when he first decided to commit murder. But even despite being so young, he has become one of the youngest serial killers in the entire world. His first victim was Rebecca Spencer, a girl lucky enough to live a couple of houses away from Craig. He simply broke into the house knowing that the victim is alone and stabbed her more than 50 times. After that, the guy lay low for a couple of years, quenching his thirst for blood. Already at the age of 15, he again attacked his neighbors, killing a mother with 2 small children. The case materials say that he did it under LSD, striking with such force that several knives simply broke in the bodies of the victims. This time Craig was arrested, but he didn't apologize, just calmly told the chronology of his actions without any emotions. Murdered and killed? Who doesn't? Because of his age, Craig should have been released from prison at 21, but he knocked himself out of another 25 years in prison by attacking his cellmate with a knife. Antonio Barbo. Antonio Barbo was only 14 years old when he and his friend attacked his own grandmother with an axe. The woman passed away. In her 78 years, she was not ready to put up resistance to 2 teenagers. Barbo and his friend Nathan Pappy were found guilty by the court. The attack itself was horrific. The unsuspecting old lady invited her grandson and his friend to her home, but when she turned her back to call Antonio's mom, he hit her in the head. The grandson used an axe and then ran to throw up in the bathroom. The grandson was sentenced to 36 years in prison with parole eligibility. In court, Antonio sobbed, apologized to his loved ones, and showed his complete remorse. However, his friend Pappy said that the attack was planned in advance by Antonio. Only the grandmother wanted to turn off and steal, and when they saw the blood, panicked and decided to cover their tracks. Having smeared the blood all over the house, they tried to drag the grandmother to the garage to load her into the car, but they didn't have enough strength. The guy simply ran away, taking a purse with money and some jewelry. Joshua Phillips. Joshua Earl Patrick Phillips was only 14 years old when he murdered 8-year-old neighbor Maddie Clifton. At the inquest, Phillips confessed that he attacked Clifton to get her to stop whining after he accidentally hit her with a baseball during a game. Joshua was afraid of punishment from his father, who had forbidden him to play in the yard at home, and the goal came while he was away. The boy was afraid that a howling and wailing would attract the attention of the adults. Suddenly, someone would tell his father that he was playing here against his prohibition. Joshua dragged the girl inside the house and hit her over the head with a baseball bat again, and then hid the girl's body under his bed. The boy was arrested when his mother discovered Maddie's body. Phillips was tried as an adult and purposely moved the proceedings to another county, fearing the reaction of the locals. The people wanted a trial of their own. Phillips' lawyer didn't call anyone. A defense witness even discouraged his parents from testifying. Phillips also didn't utter a word in court. It took the jury only 2 hours to find Phillips guilty. He received a life sentence without parole. They would have given him the death penalty, but the state law says it's only for convicts over the age of 16. Eddie Devine. Eddie Devine is a teenager from Jackson who was sentenced to an incredible 90 years in prison. The 17-year-old was found guilty of 2 counts at once: armed carjacking and kidnapping. Devine and his friend Remy Harvin, who were only 13 years old each, armed themselves with an ice pick, attacked a young woman and stole her car. Fortunately, the woman managed to escape when the boys stopped to put gas in the car. Devine was arrested by the Flowood Police Department. On December 20, 2014, he was sentenced to 30 years for assault, 30 years for armed robbery, and 30 years for kidnapping. Fair enough. Roxana Sikorski. Roxana Sikorski was only 15 years old when she woke up in the middle of the night and attacked her brother. She had previously tried to get away from her parents and had beaten up other siblings. For all of these crimes, Roxanne was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Prior to her sentencing, Roxanne's mother begged the court for clemency for her adopted daughter. Lauren Sikorski said she is desperate and Roxanne needs constant psychological help. After all, she is still a fragile girl and adult prison will shatter her innocent world. Roxanne was only 4 years old when the Sikorskis adopted her and her 2 brothers from Poland because they had experienced abuse in their birth family. Roxanne, of course, apologized to her parents for not being the daughter they wanted her to be, but it didn't affect the verdict. Dylan Shoemaker. Dylan Shoemaker was charged with second-degree murder and first-degree assault in connection with the death of 1-year-old Austin Smith. Shoemaker, who was 16 years old, was watching his girlfriend's children. It is unknown for what reason, but he freaked out and hit little Smith. Investigators determined that the child died from blunt force trauma. 16-year-old Dylan confessed to the murder in March 2013. During his trial in court, Shoemaker cried and apologized to the victim's mother. He said he didn't mean to hurt Austin, but the boy's mother, Ashley Smith, refused to accept his words. He received a 25-year sentence and is scheduled for parole in 2031. Courvoisier Sims. Courvoisier Sims was just 15 years old when he attacked and killed 2 other teens in 2015. Sims was sentenced to a prison term of 70 to 120 years in prison. He pleaded guilty to the deaths of James Starr and Brendan Phelps, although the situation itself was rather bizarre. The guy went to buy a firearm in December 2015, and when he left the store, he saw 2 teenagers blocking his way. The boy thought he was going to be robbed and pulled out his new toy. He opened fire on them. His attorney argued that the boy panicked when he realized one of the boys had a gun. Sims said at the trial that he regrets everything that happened, but finding out what the 2 dead men really wanted is no longer possible. Gregory Brooks and Rio John Thompson. A heinous crime was committed by Gregory Brooks Jr. along with Rio John Thompson. The bodies of Ruby and Milton McClendon were found in October 2009, about 2 miles from their home in a forest preserve where they were robbed. Everything of value was also taken from the home. Gregory Brooks Jr., 19, was sentenced to 120 years in prison, while his 18-year-old partner received just 17 years. The defendant's father said he tried to keep his son safe from street gangs, but apparently to no avail. Prosecutors say Brooks and Thompson attacked the McClendons and stole $50 in cash, a rifle, jewelry, and other items before locking the pair in a closet. Deciding they didn't need the elderly witnesses, they forced them into the trunk of a car and drove them into the woods, where they beat them to death. According to the investigators' version, Gregory was the one who did the killing, which is why he got a multiple of the sentence. Lionel Tate. Lionel Alexander Tate is the youngest teenager to receive life without parole. The kid had just turned 14 years old. In January 2001, in Broward County, Florida, Tate was alone with Tiffany, who was visiting as his mother Kathleen was babysitting. The children were playing too loudly and interfering with Kathleen's cooking, so she sent them to another room. After about 45 minutes, Tate approached his mother and informed her that Tiffany was not breathing. He said that while they were struggling, He grabbed her head and she hit the table. But the guy was clearly lying. Tate was convicted of hitting her with such force that Tiffany's liver ruptured. Forensics found that she had so many bruises all over her body, it was as if she'd collided with a truck. Neck, arms, hands, feet, torso. Hence the verdict, despite the mother and son's version of a bad fall. Brenda Spencer. Brenda Spencer, a 16-year-old girl who lived in a house across the street from the school, went on a real shooting spree. On January 29, 1979, she killed 2 and wounded 9 others when she opened fire on Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego from the window of her home. The victims were school principal Burton Rugg and custodian Mike Sorchard. 8 students and a police officer were injured. Spencer pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and assault with a firearm. Brenda was sentenced to life in prison. When asked why she did it, she gave out the oft-quoted phrase, "I just don't like Mondays." George Stinney. George Stinney Jr. was convicted of murdering 2 young girls. At the age of 14, he attacked Betty June, who was just 11 years old, and Emma Thames, who had just celebrated her 7th birthday. George was sentenced to death and executed in the electric chair in June 1944. He became the youngest American to be sentenced to death and executed in the 20th century. The trial against George took place on April 24, 1944. He went before a jury that took only 10 minutes to deliberate, after which they declared that the boy was guilty. The judge sentenced him to death by electrocution. Stinney's family tried to beg for forgiveness from the state governor, but he only sent the case back for a retrial that went nowhere. Nikolas Cruz. Nikolas Cruz is the teenager who was able to sneak a rifle into Parkland High School and shoot 17 people at once. He was sentenced to life in prison. It all happened on February 14, 2018 at 2:21 p.m. local time. The guy waited until the end of the school shift at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and pulled the fire alarm. The instructions were for all teachers and students to run outside through the emergency exit. Cruz was standing there shooting people like a shooting gallery. He had purposely brought smoke bombs with him to confuse the fire system and limit the escape routes for his victims. Around 2:27 p.m., Cruz dumped his rifle on the 3rd floor of the school and fled the scene, mingling with students fleeing the school. True to form, he was apprehended by police an hour later after running the shooter through security cameras. Heather Opel. The 14-year-old girl was sentenced to 22 years in prison without parole. Her mother, Barbara Opel, lived with 64-year-old Jerry Dwayne Heyman and his 89-year-old mother, whom she cared for. To steal $40,000, she paid 5 teenagers, including her own 13-year-old daughter, to kill Heyman. The man was dying full of bewilderment as a mob of children piled over him and set up a veritable ambush in the bushes of the house. Jeremy was returning home in Everett, Washington on the evening of April 13, 2001, when one of the boys hit him on the head with an aluminum bat. At that point, some kind of circus began, with 2 other teens starting to hit Heyman with toy bats and little girls stabbing him to death with knives. The teens then mopped the floor, loaded the body into a car, and dumped the remains by the roadside on the outskirts of Everett. Creepy story.